Have you ever noticed that the moment boredom creeps in, the instinct is to escape, to reach for a phone, turn on the TV, drown the silence in endless distractions? You're sitting in a waiting room and everyone around you is scrolling, heads down, thumbs moving, earbuds in. The silence between strangers filled with manufactured noise. And you're just sitting there. No phone, no podcast, no desperate reach for distraction. Just existing. Someone glances at you, briefly confused, maybe concerned, then looks away. Because in this world, stillness looks like something's wrong. But here's what they don't see. Inside that stillness, your mind is moving. Not racing, not anxious, not empty, moving. Connecting ideas you read last week to something you noticed this morning. Replaying a conversation, not with regret, but with curiosity. Watching the light shift across the floor and feeling something you can't quite name. Your mind doesn't need external noise because it generates its own depth. And the world calls that boredom. But boredom is not an enemy. It's a door, a passage into the depths of the mind where the greatest ideas have always been born. Most of us fear boredom, not because it's painful, but because it forces us to face ourselves. When there are no distractions left, the unanswered questions of life emerge. Questions about purpose, meaning, and the reality we often avoid. People assume stillness means emptiness, that if you're not consuming content, you're wasting time. That choosing silence over stimulation means something's missing. But that's not the full truth. Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes the people most comfortable with boredom are the ones with the richest internal worlds. History tells us this. Those who have embraced boredom, who have allowed themselves to sit in solitude and think, have changed the world. Researchers at the University of Rochester discovered something fascinating about solitude. When they measured people's brain activity and emotional states during alone time, they found that solitude naturally decreases high arousal emotions, both positive and negative. Your nervous system literally downshifts, not into numbness, but into what they call a deactivated state, a state where deeper thinking becomes possible. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who completely entrenches himself against boredom also entrenches himself against himself." This is the tragedy of the modern age. People fear solitude because it forces them to confront who they really are. They fear boredom because it reveals what they lack. What if the discomfort you feel in constant stimulation isn't a personal failing? What if your brain is simply wired to process the world differently, more slowly, more thoroughly, more internally? What if you're not avoiding life by sitting still? What if boredom is the beginning of brilliance? Consider this. How often do you see someone waiting in line without looking at their phone? How many people can sit alone in a quiet room without feeling restless? When was the last time you allowed yourself to simply exist without distraction? By avoiding boredom, we avoid deep thought. By drowning in entertainment, we numb ourselves to the brilliance that lies dormant within us. When you finally allow yourself to just sit, no phone, no music, no task demanding attention, something specific happens in your body. Your breathing slows without you trying. The tension in your shoulders releases slightly. The constant low-grade alertness that comes from processing screens and sounds and other people's energy, it fades. You become aware of thoughts you've been carrying but never examining. Questions without answers. Observations without conclusions. Ideas that need time to form. This isn't meditation. You're not trying to empty your mind. You're letting it fill with what's actually there. And for the first time in hours, maybe days, you can hear yourself think. Boredom forces the mind to become creative. Without external stimulation, the brain starts making connections, forming new ideas, and seeing the world differently. This started young, didn't it? Maybe you were the kid who could sit through a long car ride without needing a movie. who didn't panic when left alone in a quiet room, who genuinely enjoyed moments that others called boring. Adults noticed. They worried sometimes. "Are you okay?" they'd ask. "Why don't you go play with the others?" And you learned something dangerous. You learned that your natural state, the one that felt easiest, most sustainable, looked wrong from the outside. So you compensated. You forced yourself to be more engaged, more social, more visibly entertained. Not because you needed it, because they needed to see it. The quiet became something you hid instead of something you inhabited. By constantly escaping boredom, we weaken our ability to focus on deep tasks. We stifle creativity by never giving the mind space to wander. We lose touch with ourselves, unable to hear the thoughts buried beneath the noise. But for those who embrace boredom, the rewards are extraordinary. History is filled with examples of how boredom has led to some of the greatest discoveries and creations. Isaac Newton's famous discovery happened during the Great Plague of 1665, when Cambridge University closed. Newton returned home to Woolsthorpe Manor, isolated, with nothing to do but think. In 1626, Newton's friend William Stukely recorded their conversation in what became the Memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's Life. Stukely wrote, "After dinner, the weather being warm, we went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees. He told me he was just in the same situation as when formerly the notion of gravitation came into his mind, occasioned by the fall of an apple, as he sat in a contemplative mood. Newton was alone in his garden, lost in thought, when he began questioning why objects fall. He was not distracted by social media, entertainment, or meaningless conversation. His mind was free to connect ideas. Had he been born in today's world, constantly scrolling through TikTok or YouTube, would he have made his discoveries? Another example is James Watt. According to accounts from his cousin Marion Campbell, the young Watt would sit for hours watching a kettle boil, fascinated by the steam lifting the lid. His aunt reportedly scolded him. "I've never seen such an idle boy. Aren't you ashamed of yourself just wasting your time like this?" But Watt was not wasting time. He was observing. He was questioning. Why did steam behave the way it did? Could this power be harnessed? This simple observation in what others called boredom led to improvements in the steam engine that transformed industry, travel, and economics. One of the greatest technological revolutions of all time started with a moment of stillness. And in modern times, boredom has played a role in innovation. Steve Jobs famously embraced solitude. His biographer, Walter Isaacson, noted that taking a long walk was Jobs' preferred way to have a serious conversation. Johnny Ive, Apple's legendary designer, recalled, "So much of our time together was spent quietly walking." Jobs didn't walk for exercise. He walked because his mind worked best in motion and solitude. According to Tony Fadell, creator of the iPod, Jobs would use vacation time not to disconnect, but to ponder the next product, the next direction for Apple, new technologies. He'd read books, seek out conversations, and find inspiration in unexpected places. Then he'd call his team with breakthrough ideas born in that quiet. These stories are not coincidences. They reveal a pattern. When the mind is free from distractions, it discovers things the distracted mind never will. Your brain has a network called the default mode network. It's active when you're not focused on the external world, when you're daydreaming, remembering, imagining, making connections between ideas. Neuroscientist Ben Schofty at Baylor College of Medicine did something remarkable. He recorded brain activity in real time while people engaged in creative thinking tasks. What he found was striking. The default mode network doesn't just activate during creative thought, it initiates it. When researchers disrupted this network using direct brain stimulation, People's ability to generate original ideas dropped immediately. This network thrives in boredom. It needs the absence of external demands to do what it does best: connect disparate concepts, explore possibilities, build internal models of reality. Your comfort with boredom isn't laziness or social avoidance. It's your brain accessing the mode where it thinks most deeply. In today's world, avoiding boredom has become an obsession. The modern mind is constantly overstimulated. Social media, entertainment, endless noise. Anything but silence. We live in a culture that pathologizes stillness. Eating alone in a restaurant gets concerned looks. Declining social invitations too often gets you labelled antisocial. Spending a weekend by yourself requires explanation, sometimes defence. The message is clear and constant. Healthy people are social, connected, busy, visible. Choosing time alone must mean something's wrong. But look at what this culture produces. Burnout, decision fatigue, the inability to hear your own thoughts without a podcast narrating them. People who've forgotten what they actually want because they've spent so long responding to what others need. The world will always push you toward distraction, but the choice is yours. You can avoid boredom, filling every moment with noise, never hearing your own thoughts, and losing your creative potential. Or you can embrace boredom, let your mind think freely, and unlock ideas that could change your life. You're not broken for preferring fewer inputs. You're adapted differently, and that difference is becoming rarer, which makes it more valuable. Philosophers like Blaise Pascal have long understood this. He once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." What does this mean? It means that without distraction, the mind is forced to think, and thinking leads to growth. Here's what changes when you understand this about yourself. You stop apologizing for needing alone time, not in a defensive way, just matter-of-factly. The way someone with different sleep needs doesn't apologize for going to bed earlier. You start recognizing the difference between loneliness and boredom. Loneliness is painful isolation, wanting connection, and not having it. Boredom is chosen stillness, the willingness to sit with your own thoughts without entertainment. One hurts, one restores. Julie Bowker at the University of Buffalo studied social withdrawal and found something the field had missed for decades. There are people who withdraw from social interaction not out of fear or anxiety, but out of genuine preference. She called it unsociability. And unlike shy or avoidant withdrawal, unsociability wasn't linked to negative outcomes. It was linked to creativity. These aren't people who can't socialise. They're people who don't initiate it, but also don't decline invitations. They get just enough peer interaction that when they're alone, they can actually enjoy the boredom. They can think, create, develop ideas, like an artist in a studio, or an academic in their office, or a scientist alone in a laboratory, a writer in a cabin in the woods, a painter in a bare studio. You might start noticing when stimulation stops feeling nourishing and starts feeling numbing, when scrolling is filling time rather than feeding curiosity, when saying yes to every social invitation leaves you drained instead of energized. And in that noticing, something shifts. You give yourself permission to choose differently. Maybe you leave the party earlier than everyone else, not because you're unhappy, but because you've had enough. Maybe you take a walk without headphones and let your mind wander where it wants to go. Maybe you sit in a cafe alone with a book and feel completely content while everyone around you is frantically connected to elsewhere. Not perfectly, not every time, but slowly you start designing your life around what actually sustains you instead of what looks right from the outside. You realise that the ideas that matter most to you, the connections you make, the questions you ask, the creativity you bring to your work, they don't emerge in the noise. They emerge in the boredom. They emerge in the gaps. Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher who deeply explored human intellect, wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is truly free." If you want to sharpen your focus, start by eliminating distractions. If you want to enhance your creativity, allow yourself to experience boredom. And if you want to truly understand yourself, spend time alone in silence. What if your resistance to constant stimulation isn't a flaw to fix? What if it's a capacity to protect? The capacity to hear yourself, to know what you actually think instead of what the algorithm suggests you should think, to create space for the kind of deep processing that the world desperately needs but rarely rewards. You're not missing out by choosing boredom. You're accessing something most people have forgotten how to reach. Remember that waiting room? Everyone scrolling, you sitting still. What looked like absence was actually presence. What looked like boredom was actually depth. What looked like wasting time was actually creating space for brilliance. Schopenhauer also wrote, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. If you want to see what others cannot, you must do what others will not. Sit in silence and think. The world will keep offering you distractions, louder, faster, more insistent, and you'll keep choosing boredom. Not because you're better than anyone else, because your brain works differently. And that difference deserves space. You might always be the person who leaves early, who prefers the walk alone over the group hike, who genuinely enjoys an evening with nothing planned more than a packed social calendar. And that's not something to outgrow, it's something to understand. Because understanding changes everything. You stop waiting for the day you'll finally want constant connection. You stop measuring yourself against people whose nervous systems need different things. You start recognizing that your comfort with boredom isn't antisocial. It's differently social. You engage when it matters. You withdraw when you need to. And both are legitimate ways to be human. There's a kind of richness that only grows in boredom. Ideas that need time to form. Thoughts that need space to breathe. Insights that emerge when no one's asking you to perform. The world mistakes stillness for emptiness, but you know better. You know that the mind doesn't stop when the noise does. It starts. Not anxious, not racing, not avoiding, just thinking. The way minds were designed to think before we interrupted them every 6 seconds. Boredom is not the enemy. It's not loneliness. It's not something wrong with you. It's where you meet yourself, where you remember what you actually care about, where creativity lives, where genius is born, and you don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to fix it. You just need to protect it. Because what you're protecting isn't isolation, it's depth. And the world needs that more than it knows. Boredom is not the enemy. It is the beginning of brilliance. You've spent your life in a world that fears the very thing you've learned to embrace. That calls stillness boredom, when you know it's actually thinking. Here's what I'm curious about. Have you ever had a great idea in a moment of boredom? That breakthrough that came when you finally stopped trying and just sat with the question? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Someone who's been told their whole life that boredom is something to escape. I'll be reading everyone